Now, you can't stop the thug, you can only hope to contain her. Haley, who seemed like a dead woman walking for most of week 5, clutched up in the blockbuster to remain in the house after making herself quite the house pariah. However, the thug is not only a physical specimen, she's also quite the dynamic social creature, because before the blockbuster, there was actually a lot of discussion about potentially keeping Haley over Chuk. That vote obviously never came to fruition because Haley won the blockbuster, but I think the fact that it was even being discussed says a lot about how badly Chuk's game had fallen apart within a week's time. Chuk had an abysmal and downright embarrassing final week. He spent most of it being extremely delusional, acting like he always had his finger on the pulse of the game despite being one of the few people blindsided by the vote the week prior. Instead of using the block as a wake-up call, he became a sore loser, diminished other people's games, particularly Taylor, who was running laps around him, and spent way too much time isolating himself with Haley. And that's what's so frustrating about Chuk's game. There were opportunities for him to do something. We literally just watched Kamu save himself the week prior by getting into rooms, telling people what they needed to hear, and completely changing the trajectory of an HOH. Chuk could have at least attempted something similar, but instead he basically acted like Chuk is the greatest, Chuk knows everything, and everybody should just be handed to Chuk. And apparently, along with all of that, Chuk had a smelly balls. Taylor was tired of cleaning up after somebody with smelly balls, and Chuk basically denied that he smelled. Even when we're talking about his smelly balls, the man lacks self-awareness. It was the same thing that we saw in his game all season long. Smelly balls ChukGPT was a fun punching bag for the season. We either didn't see or hear from him at all, or we heard way too much with his terrible reads and terrible opinions spewing all over the house. Ultimately, after Haley saved herself, Chuk was evicted 9-1 over Barrett, ending one of the worst preseason winner picks I have ever made. I was never more wrong about somebody coming into the season, and I'm very happy to see Chuk go. To me, he genuinely goes down as one of the worst Big Brother players of the new era. So what is the lay of the land heading into week 6 after a week 5 that saw new battle lines drawn, new enemies created, and perhaps a whole new interesting game ahead? Well, there's still a ton in flux as I'm recording this prior to the veto meeting. It seems almost certain that Devens will be using his Diamond Power of Veto, and it's still kind of up in the air exactly what Yash will do with the regular Power of Veto. So these rankings are going to be based on the information we have right now and what I suspect is going to happen once the vetoes are used. But before we get into it, if you guys have been enjoying these rankings and all the Big Brother content we've been putting out, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really does help a lot. Let's try to get the channel to 400 subscribers. And if you want to support the channel a little bit further, the best way to do that is to go over to my wife's Depop Mama Pics, link in the description, and tell her Treeb sent you. With all that out of the way, let's get into this week's power rankings. Coming in at number 12 and going up one spot, I have Haley. Haley was very similar to Chuk last week, where she spent a lot of time isolated with him instead of actively campaigning, despite the fact that there was a legitimate conversation happening about keeping her if she was sitting next to Chuk after the blockbuster. And that's been a theme of this season. A lot of these votes have shifted because the people voting decide to change their minds, not because the people on the block are doing something particularly impressive to save themselves. We saw Taylor and Melody basically spend entire weeks in bed and survive because the game moved around them, and Haley was heading down a similar path. Ultimately, Haley didn't need the vote flip because she did the one thing she's consistently shown she can do. She won a competition, winning the blockbuster and saving herself, and I do think that could have breathed some new life into the thug. People like Drew and Melody started spending more time with her, and the fact that there was already a contingent willing to keep her showed there was potentially some move to maneuver. Unfortunately, Haley's reads remained spectacularly bad. She was saying Yash was the one person she trusted 100%, was convinced he wouldn't nominate her, and then Yash nominated her. She doesn't think that the FAP alliance is actually an alliance. She just thinks that they're friends, and she even said on the show that she's a threat to win. Haley, I promise you, you are not a threat to win. What's even crazier is that Taylor, Yash, and Kamu have actively discussed potentially bringing Haley in as a fourth, and yet Yash still nominated her and now isn't automatically using the veto on her. She's drawing dead in almost every final 2 scenario. She's a massive shield, and she's somebody you could theoretically drag deep into the game. People aren't necessarily keeping Haley because they love Haley. Haley is useful because of who she isn't and who she's against. But as things currently stand, if the veto isn't used on her and Kamu wins the blockbuster, the thug is probably finally going home. And considering how many times she's already looked dead in the water, I'm still not completely convinced somebody won't find a reason to keep keep her again. Coming in at number 11 and going down one spot, I have Latrice. Latrice is coming off of her HOH week, and I think the biggest thing for her this week is that she's really trying to secure something with Angela. She was one of the first people to sell out that there was a movement to target the vets, which Lala herself was technically on board with, but when she talks about targeting the vets, she means Devens and Dee, not Angela. She basically used this information to further solidify that relationship with Angela, and I honestly don't hate that move for her individually. The problem with Lala is she's been way too free range with information this past couple weeks. She tells Angela about her deal with Kamu and how Kamu avoided the block during her HOH, and she makes it clear that when she says vet, she specifically is talking about Dee and Devens. Meanwhile, she's going around saying if Drew shares any of this information, she'll kill him, when Lala's loose lips are really the problem here, and her sharing all this information inadvertently painted a bigger target on Taylor. Angela basically takes what Lala tells her as confirmation that the anti-vet movement is real, and Taylor ends up taking the heat for it, despite the irony that Lala was originally the one pitching Devens as an HOH target while Taylor was warning her against it. I also think that the conversation surrounding a potential Haley Chuk vote last week were a warning sign for Lala. That flip never actually happened because Haley won the blockbuster, but Lala wasn't aware that there was a serious discussion about changing the vote. Considering how much she had been trusting Angela, being left out of something like that should have made her reevaluate exactly where she stood with her. Instead, her biggest story this week has basically become her war with Haley. They apparently got into a pretty big fight during the HOH lockdown that we didn't see on feeds or during the episode, and Lala somehow has become the new Haley in the eyes of the former Red Corner vets / actually Haley conglomerate. They're calling her a bully and feeding into Haley's belief that Lala had HOH-itis, which is actually hilarious considering Haley had one of the worst cases of HOH-itis imaginable literally 1 week earlier. Overall, Lala still has Taylor, and I do think strengthening that Angela relationship gives her another avenue moving forward potentially, but she's leaking way too much information to somebody who isn't necessarily going to protect her interests, and she's now becoming a pretty visible enemy for a group of people that already has a lot of power. I don't think her HOH did enough to meaningfully improve her game long term, and this week she started giving some of that progress right back. Coming in at number 10 and going up one spot, I have Barrett. Barrett continues to be Barrett, and there was one conversation last week with Drew and Devens that perfectly encapsulates why I'm so low on his game. They were discussing potential targets. Drew brings up that Mallory isn't someone they should go after because she's cool with the two of them. Devens asks if they have an alliance name, the FAP contingent, and Barrett and Drew exchange this look like they've just been caught with their hands in the cookie jar and they just tell him about FAP. They are giving this guy literally anything that he wants. And the worst part is Drew was actually making some decent progress in that conversation, talking about Mallory wanting to work with Devens and Angela, and then Barrett has to chime in with, yeah, the only holdup is Mallory doesn't really trust Dee after she put her up week 1. Like, why are you saying this? Barrett just cannot stop spilling information that does absolutely nothing to benefit him. That conversation quite literally helped turn Dee, who had been really focused on Taylor, against the FAP alliance for the time being. And that's what makes Barrett's loose lips so damaging. He doesn't just give information away, sometimes he's actively giving people reasons to target the players he's supposed to be protecting. To give Barrett and Drew some credit, they did have probably one of their better strategic conversations of the season after Lala told them about the plan to target the vets last week. They talked through what they should tell the vets and how they could rat out the information while hopefully protecting Mallory and Melody in the process. And this was a big improvement after that last conversation we just talked about. As frustrating as running that information directly back to the vets is, for what Barrett and Drew are trying to accomplish, I actually thought this was a good plan. The problem is that Barrett still seems to have this terrible read that he'd rather sit next to a vet at the end because the newbies won't vote for a vet to win, and Drew shares that same sentiment. I don't know where they're getting this from. Just because people are saying the vets have already had their shot and need to go doesn't mean that there's some Big Brother 14 style pact where nobody will vote for them. If anything, if one of these vets survives this entire anti-vet contingent and gets to the end, I think people might respect that more. And Barrett's relationship with Dee continues to be a double-edged sword. He's constantly going to bat for her and pitching why she should stay to people where keeping Dee isn't even remotely in their best interest, while Dee is perfectly willing to throw Barrett under the bus for a sandwich. He's making himself a bigger target because of how close he is to her and seemingly doing nothing to mitigate that. Now, Barrett is likely looking at becoming a replacement nominee if the veto is used, but it doesn't look like the veto is going to be use, but he is a name that had been brought up from Yash because Yash knows somebody leaked information from their group. With Devens' Diamond Power of Veto potentially coming into play, Barrett should still have an avenue to survive, but this is just where his game is now. He's become this perpetual pawn who's useful enough to keep around, but not respected enough for people to care about putting him in danger. Barrett moves up one spot. That's much more about Chuk leaving and Haley continuing to crash than anything Barrett has done. I still see almost no agency from him. He spills way too much information, and when somebody he cares about is in danger, my expectation at this point is that Barrett will probably just do whatever the vets tell him to do. Coming in at number 9 and not going up or down any spots, I have Melody. I think Melody has started to realize something that's becoming more and more apparent over the last couple of weeks. She and Mallory are kind of on an island together. After hearing about the conversation between Mallory and Dee, Melody basically said they need to watch what they tell Drew, and I think that's a great read. Because as much as Drew and Barrett are technically their allies, Drew and Barrett aren't doing Melody and Mallory any favors with how much information they spill. Melody is starting to pick up on that, and I think she's understanding that at the end of the day, she and Mallory might be the only two people they can 100% trust. They were literally tethered together last week, and honestly, their games are metaphorically tethered as well. If one of them goes, I think the other one becomes significantly more vulnerable. Their best hope for survival is probably each other, and the writing on the wall with that has never been more apparent than it is now. That being said, I actually think Melody has started to open up some additional avenues. She had a long conversation with Dee that I thought was really good for her game, especially considering Dee was one of the people responsible for saving her the week prior. Continuing to nurture that relationship is exactly what Melody needs to be doing, and now FAP has linked up with the vets to create the Mosh Pit Alliance, which could be really important for Melody's longevity. For somebody like Melody, who has spent most of the season struggling to find a stable place in the house, you take whatever structure you can get. Overall, I don't think Melody had some incredible week, which is why she stays at number 9, but I actually like some of the awareness she's showing. She's starting to understand who she can and can't trust. She's strengthening that Dee relationship, and she now has a potential structure protecting her. The problem is that she still doesn't have much agency. If Mallory disappears, I think Melody's game could unravel pretty quick. Coming in at number 8 and going down 5 spots, I have Kamu. Kamu dropping 5 spots is almost entirely circumstantial because for most of this week, I actually thought he was playing one of the best games in the house. Coming off of the work he did saving himself during Lala's HOH, it felt like everybody suddenly wanted a piece of Kamu. Dee and Devens were talking about how much they loved him. Taylor and Yash wanted to go deep with him, and even Haley was someone he was able to fully reconcile with. And I think it shows the difference between Kamu and some of the other players. He's gotten burned, he's watched people play well, and it feels like he's actually learning how to play Big Brother by playing Big Brother. He's very coachable, which is something you'd probably expect from an athlete. He sees something work, learns from it, and applies it to his own game. He also locked in a final 2 with Yash, and with Yash winning HOH, Kamu should have been sitting pretty. And I genuinely think Kamu has all the tools to win this game. He's already had a marquee strategic moment. His social game has become really strong, and physically, he's basically made in a lab for late game Big Brother competitions, and yet somehow he's in massive danger. Devens is almost certainly using the Diamond Power of Veto after going back and forth on who the target should be. Kamu has landed directly in Devens' crosshairs. If the vetoes play out how it currently looks, we could end up with Kamu, Haley, and Angela sitting on the block heading into the blockbuster, and this would be such a shitty way for Kamu's game to potentially end because I think he's legitimately been outplaying the vets in stretches recently. He survived being thrown under the bus, repaired his relationship with Haley, has Taylor and Yash firmly on his side, and somehow the thing that might finally take him out is an insanely overpowered twist that he couldn't really account for. However, Kamu and Yash are not completely innocent here. This is where they might have made an absolutely asinine mistake. They've spent all week talking about wanting to protect Haley and potentially bring her in as a 4th. Yash literally won the veto, and they're still considering leaving Haley on the block because they think they have Drew. They do not have Drew. If you believe Haley is good for your game and you have the ability to guarantee her safety, use the veto on Haley. That's also why Kamu drops all the way from 3 to 8, despite me still being extremely high on him as a player. His actual gameplay this week has mostly been good, but his position has gone from one of the safest in the entire house to potentially needing to win a blockbuster just to survive. And if Kamu does go home because Yash leaves Haley on the block, Devens uses the Diamond Power of Veto, and Kamu loses the blockbuster, as unfair as the twist is, Kamu and Yash will have nobody to blame but themselves for not taking the free opportunity they had to protect a number, because then the the block would have been Barrett, Angela, and Kamu, and then they could have got rid of Angela or Barrett, and that is a direct number for the other side. Speaking of Angela, coming in at number 7 and going down one spot, I have Angela, and hopefully I remember to go back and spell her name right. Lala has been extremely open with her, basically spilling everything about the anti-vet movement, her deal with Kamu that kept him off the block. Angela has done a good job making Lala feel comfortable enough to give her all this information. The problem is that Angela continues to find herself in unnecessary chaos with people she's supposed to be close with. She and Lala were already going back and forth prior to the eviction, and with Haley surviving, Angela now has 2 different side quests going on, while the main plot of the week is happening around her while she's on the block. She's dealing with Lala drama, she's trying to repair things with Haley, and meanwhile, she's on the block. I really thought there was a good chance that Angela would lose it a little bit once she hit the block, especially after being in such a comfortable position all season, but to her credit, she handled it really well, especially compared to Dee. And then I remembered this is Angela. She got nominated like 7 times in Big Brother 26. If anybody knows how to get thrown on the block and just keep trucking, it's her. Honestly, I think being occupied with Lala and Haley drama might have actually helped her. Angela barely had time to have some massive nomination crash out because she's on a completely different storyline from everybody else. She was even legitimately discussed as someone Yash could use the regular veto on, which is kind of crazy considering she's supposed to be one of the biggest power players in the house. That ultimately doesn't look like it's going to happen. And despite being nominated, I don't actually think Angela is in that much danger. The scenario where I could actually see her leaving is if she somehow ends up sitting next to Barrett after the blockbuster, and right now that doesn't seem particularly likely because Yash probably won't be using the veto. So Angela drops 1 spot because the structure around the vets is finally being attacked and some of the outside relationships are getting messier, but I still think she's in a pretty solid position. She has Lala giving her information, she survived the Haley fallout better than I expected, and even on the block, she doesn't feel like a person anybody is particularly interested in sending home. Coming in at number 6 and going up 1 spot, I have Mallory. I continue to think Mallory has way more self-awareness than the men of FAP. When Dee comes to press her about Drew telling her that Mallory would have put Dee up as a replacement nominee, Mallory immediately reads the situation as Dee only wants to work with us so that the move doesn't happen, and she's right. That's a good read, and it shows that Mallory understands the transactional nature of some of these relationships better than Drew and Barrett do. Poor Mallory just cannot catch a break with getting ratted out though. She tells Drew something, Drew tells somebody else. It gets back to Dee and suddenly Mallory is having to answer for information she probably never expected to leave that room. Dee even threw Barrett under the bus during their conversation, so I think Mallory is becoming increasingly aware of just how leaky this entire group is. That's why I still think Mallory and Melody's games are metaphorically tethered together. At this point, they might be the only 2 people in the group who can completely trust each other. Drew and Barrett are technically their allies, but they're constantly leaking information to the vets and putting Mallory and Melody in worse positions because of it. That being said, Mallory isn't exactly keeping everything close to the vest herself. She's been pretty open with information this week, and pitching Kamu as a potential nominee to Yash was a little crazy. I understand that she's gotten closer with Yash and knows he wants to take a big shot, but you've got to have a better read on that relationship. Yash is extremely close with Kamu. That's just not a pitch that's going anywhere. Luckily for Mallory, Yash didn't run that back to Kamu because that's exactly the type of thing that could have unnecessarily created another enemy for her. Mallory has spent enough of this season getting information ratted out. She doesn't need to start doing the work for them. The big positive though is that people are finally including Mallory in things from multiple sides of the house. She's getting significantly more information than she was earlier in the season, and I think that's allowing the good reads she's always had to actually become a little more useful. That's really why she moves up another spot for me. Mallory has always had a decent understanding of what's happening around her, but for the most of the season, she's had 0 agency and almost no information coming her way. That's starting to change. She's still in a precarious position and desperately needs Melody around, but I think she's slowly becoming a more integrated player rather than just a perpetual nominee waiting for the next competition. Coming in at number 5 and not going up or down any spots, I have Yash. I think Yash has probably shown the most growth of anybody in the house in terms of actually learning and understanding the game. He spent the end of last week planning planting seeds with people like FAP about why they should eventually target the vets, and strategically that's exactly what he should have been doing. What I really liked about Yash's position was that even as this mini civil war started brewing between the Taylor Lala Yash side and the vets, Yash wasn't really taking the heat for it. Taylor was becoming the figurehead of that side, while Yash could be just as snaky, play just as much in the middle, and somehow sit in the background while everyone focused on bigger rivalries. Unfortunately, fucking Barrett had to go and ruin some of that. Once Barrett ratted out the conversation about targeting the vets, suddenly Devens knew Yash was in that room and started pressing him for information. Yash didn't handle that conversation particularly well because he obviously didn't know Devens already knew everything, so when Yash wasn't giving him every little detail he wanted, it created some real distance between the two, and that hurt because Yash had quite literally built one of the better relationships with Devens outside of the icon, and suddenly the vets had a legitimate reason to look at him sideways. But then Yash wins HOH, and this was fucking huge. He finally had an opportunity to turn all of this positioning into actual agency, and initially I loved what he did. He stuck to his guns and nominated Dee and Angela, and when Dee tried to bribe him to keep the two of them safe, he turned it down. That's a big baller move. A lesser player absolutely takes that money and compromises their HOH. He also seems aware of where some of the leaks are coming from. He knows Barrett has been real shady and was already considering him as a replacement nominee. He's gotten closer with the fellas. He's locked in a final 2 with Kamu, which I think could be an extremely dangerous pair if they both survive this week. And then Yash wins the veto too, so this should be a perfect Yash week. HOH, veto, all the power in the world, finally taking his shot at the vets, except there's a fucking Diamond Power of Veto floating around. I feel bad for Yash because you can't reasonably expect him to plan his entire HOH around Devens having this completely broken power. If Devens uses it on Dee and replaces these nominations, Yash's entire HOH can basically get hijacked. That's not Yash getting outplayed, that's a twist completely changing what his HOH is allowed to accomplish. But I can't completely let Yash off the hook either, because regardless of the Diamond Power of Veto, I think the optimal move was always to use the regular veto on Haley. She is your ally. Instead, Yash and Kamu seem to think they have Drew, which is just a crazy read. Yash could walk away from an HOH where he won both HOH and veto and still loses a number while taking out none of his intended targets. That's why Yash stays at 5 for me. I'm higher on Yash the player than I've ever been, and turning down Dee's bribe showed me he had some balls when he actually gets power. But this could also become his first major lesson in just how important it is to optimize every little bit of power that you have. Because after taking this shot, Yash isn't hiding anymore. Dee, Angela, and Devens know exactly where he stands now. If he misses completely and sends Haley or Kamu home because he didn't use the veto on Haley, he's probably going from hunter this week to one of the hunted next week. Coming in at number 4 and going down 2 spots, I have Dee. This was a really bad week gameplay wise for Dee, and I think a lot of the chaotic gameplay that she's gotten away with because she's been so comfortable at the top finally started to catch up with her. The Haley situation is a good example. Dee liked the idea of keeping Haley around because Haley was anti-Lala and had started reconciling with Angela, but Dee never actually did the personal work with Haley herself. So when Haley survives, there's no real reason for Haley to protect Dee or consider Dee part of the reconciliation. Angela put in that work, Dee didn't. And Dee completely misread the Yash HOH. She felt so good about him winning that she was literally celebrating in the storage room with Devens, only for Yash to turn around and nominate her. She might have been called upon initially, but when you're Dee and you've spent 5 weeks establishing yourself as one of the biggest players in the house, you don't want to be sitting in those chairs giving people the opportunity to think about it. Then we got to the BB bribe and Yash just flat out denied her $5,000, and no shit, $5,000 isn't enough to completely fuck up your HOH. I also think Dee started way too greedy with the pitch. Just keep me and Angela safe. No? Okay, just me? No? Here comes the waterworks, and none of it worked. We've talked about how Dee plays when she's comfortable, but we've also seen Dee play from the bottom before, and it's not particularly good. The sloppiest part to me was her throwing Drew's name out as a potential nominee to Yash while trying to keep herself safe. That's the type of gameplay I just don't expect for somebody of Dee's caliber. She's gotten so comfortable throwing Drew's name around with Angela and Devens that she does it here while her back is against the wall, and of course it gets reported back to Drew. And unlike some of the other other anti-Drew stuff that somehow has been ignored for weeks, Drew actually believes this one. Dee is legitimately in danger. She's trying to save herself, and when she needed another name to throw under the bus, she chose him. But here's the thing. It looks like she's going to get Devens to use the Diamond Power of Veto on her. From Dee's perspective, that's fantastic. She got herself into a terrible situation, then found a way to leverage her relationships with Devens to get herself out of it. So Dee falls from 2 to 4 because this was probably her worst week of the season strategically. She misread Yash, didn't put enough work into Haley, couldn't convince Yash with the bribe, got messy when she hit the block, and unnecessarily damaged her relationship with Drew, I think. But she's probably going to be completely safe anyway, and that's the frustrating thing about Dee's game right now. She can have a week where a lot of her flaws finally catch up with her, and because of the powers and maybe production interference, it might not matter whatsoever. Coming in at number 3 and going up one spot, I have Taylor. Now this might be the biggest hear me out of this list, but hear me out here. Taylor is really turning into the new Drew when it comes to Angela and Dee. She is getting all the smoke from those two right now, and honestly, it's getting a little ridiculous. Dee is putting piles of trash next to her. They're watching Taylor and Kamu hang out and just commentating on everything that they're doing. They just do not like this girl playing the game against them. So Taylor definitely has to watch her back because she's got some major ops, and unfortunately those ops also have some superpowers, but they could be drained this week. I do think Taylor made a couple of mistakes that helped put her in this position. Kamu pitched bringing Dee into the primary alliance with himself, Taylor, and Devens, and Taylor shut it down because she was very particular about what she wanted that alliance to be. She was fine with Dee being a tether, but not part of the actual core. I think that was a missed opportunity. Dee literally said she didn't want to get into an alliance with Taylor because she didn't want a reason to not nominate her. Maybe you should give her that reason. Taylor was also a little too sloppy introducing this anti-vet sentiment to the house. There's just too much time in Big Brother for information like that to travel, and of course it did. Lala told Angela, Barrett and Devens heard about it, and the frustrating part is Taylor wasn't even the one initially pushing the hardest for this shot. Lala was talking about putting Devens up during her HOH, and Taylor was actually the one warning against it, but Lala telling Angela that she personally didn't want Angela out before jury inadvertently made Taylor look like a bigger anti-vet figurehead. So there were definitely some missteps here. If you're going to start planting seeds after taking a shot at this group, you better eventually take the shot. Granted, Devens having the Diamond Power of Veto would have made taking the shot a nightmare anyway, but Taylor has become much more visible than she needed to be, and yet I actually really like where Taylor could come out of this week. Weirdly enough, Kamu potentially leaving might not even be the worst thing for Taylor's winning chances. Obviously, he's one of her closest allies and she'd rather keep him, but I could easily see a world where Taylor rides Kamu and Yash into the sunset and then realizes she's sitting next to two guys who are extremely good at competitions and have much more obvious resumes. If Kamu leaves, Taylor suddenly has every reason to get closer with Melody, Mallory, Lala, and potentially even Angela. And that's a group where I think Taylor has a much more realistic path to actually winning at the end. She'd become more of a free agent in the middle instead of being viewed as part of this obvious Taylor, Kamu, Yash structure. And even if Kamu does survive, I think his and Yash's threat levels could actually start protecting Taylor. Angela and Dee might hate Taylor, but are you really going to target her before Kamu and Yash when those two are winning HOHs, vetoes, blockbusters, and are obviously capable of running the competitions down the stretch? So for Taylor, I think everything depends on how she reacts to this veto ceremony and whatever chaos comes out of it this week. If she keeps forcing the anti-vet agenda and makes herself the face of that movement, she's going to get herself into trouble. But if Taylor can recognize what's happening, distance herself a little bit, let all of these other people take their shots at each other, and just watch the bullets fly from the middle, I think she and Drew could quietly come out of this week in two of the best positions in the entire house. Taylor's game isn't clean, and she definitely is making herself more visible than she needs to be. But compared to the Taylor we saw lying in bed in week 1, this girl is playing Big Brother now. And even with Dee and Angela coming after her, I think she has more legitimate winning paths opening up than she's had at any point this season. Coming in at number 2 and going up 6 spots, I have Drew. What a fucking turnaround for Drew. He goes from 8 last week all the way up to 2. And I think this was probably the best week we've seen from him in terms of actually executing the floating rat style game that he's seemingly been trying to play all season. Now that doesn't mean the Drew no awareness allegations are completely gone. I still think Drew has some pretty bad reads on the end game. He's talked about being more loyal to the crossovers than FAP because he'd rather sit next to a vet at the end. This isn't Big Brother 14 where some anti-returnee jury pact is going on. Sometimes it feels like he thinks he's figured everybody's game out and that these people are all extremely one-dimensional. He underestimates somebody like Kamu. He underestimates the vet's ability to win a jury vote, and he still doesn't fully grasp how dangerous some of these people are to his game. But here's where Drew deserves a ton of credit. He finally started weaponizing this middle position properly. He continued running information from Yash and Kamu directly back to the vets, and while it's annoying as hell, if you want somebody to finally take a shot at the vets, it's good gameplay for what Drew is trying to accomplish. More importantly, he convinced Yash and Kamu that he's with them, and this might have been the most important thing Drew did all week. That's the difference between this week and some of Drew's earlier rat gameplay. Before, he was constantly giving the vets information while getting absolutely nothing in return and unknowingly helping people who wanted him out. Now he's getting something out of it, and now he's dominating the fan vote, meaning there's a very good chance that Drew gets the coin of destiny. From the perspective of anybody trying to break up the vet FAP structure, that's absolutely brutal. I still don't love Drew's lack of agency when people directly tell him what to do, and I definitely don't love his long-term plan of potentially sitting to one of the vets. But this is the Drew game finally working the way it's supposed to work. He's writing information without immediately getting burned for it. Yash and Kamu thinks he's with them. The vets see the value in keeping him around. FAP is still actually his home base, and he potentially has a power coming his way. The guy who couldn't see that half the house wanted him gone 2 weeks ago has somehow stumbled or maybe finally maneuvered his way into one of the best positions in the entire house. And coming in at number 1 and not going up or down any spots, I still have Devens. Devens stays at number 1, but this is probably the least confident I've been in putting him here all season. Not because his position suddenly sucks, it absolutely doesn't, but because we're finally seeing some strategic decisions from Devens that make me question how well he's setting himself up to actually win the game rather than just control it. For most of the week, he continued showing that he's the kingpin in the Big Brother house. Yash wins HOH, finally takes a shot at the vet, and Devens is the only fucking vet who doesn't touch the block. After 6 weeks, that's not an accident. His relationships have constantly protected him in situations where Dee and Angela's just have not. But I think Devens has a problem that we haven't really seen before because this position is so foreign to him. He's used to playing from the bottom. On Survivor, he's used to people lying to him, being targeted, and having to scrape his way through another round. Now that he's the kingpin, everyone checks in with him, everyone gives him information, and he has this completely broken Diamond Power of Veto in his pocket, and I'm not entirely convinced Devens knows what to do when he's this powerful. To Devens' credit, I think he eventually started realizing that Kamu is a much bigger long-term threat, which is something I've been waiting for the vets to recognize. Taking Kamu deep because he's a shield never made sense to me. I also really liked Devens' initial plan for dealing with the Diamond Power of Veto. He wanted to somehow get Yash to nominate him instead of Dee so he could use the power on himself. That's actually really smart. You minimize the spectacle, you don't expose that you're willing to burn somebody who trusted you, and you could frame the whole thing as simply protecting yourself. That's a level of foresight that I don't think Dee or Angela have consistently shown, but that's not what's happening. Devens is going to be using his Diamond Power of Veto on Dee, and that's all well and good, but I mean, that's going to really draw a line in the sand and pronounce their relationship to the entire house, and the bigger problem is the replacement nominee. If Devens uses this power on Dee and puts up Kamu, he's not just using the power anymore, he's declaring war, and strategically, I understand wanting Kamu out. I actually agree that Kamu is someone that Devens should target sooner rather than later, but the way you take the shot matters. Yash just kept you off the block, Kamu considers you one of his closest allies, Taylor has been feeding you information and literally talked Lala out of targeting you during her HOH, and now you're potentially going to hijack Yash's HOH, save Dee, and nominate Kamu. That's an extremely Survivor way to think about Big Brother. It's this mentality of we're drawing the lines, combining the crossovers with FAP, and we're going to war with Yash, Kamu, Taylor, and Lala. But you don't necessarily need to make this act of war. You could frame Kamu as a massive threat to win and potentially get Taylor and Lala to jump ship. Instead, you make it vets versus everybody else. You're voluntarily moving yourself way up the pecking order, and that's what worries me about Devens using this power. Right now, he's somehow the kingpin without being treated like the kingpin. That's the dream position. People give him information, people care what he thinks. He's never been nominated, and he has an absurd amount of influence without everybody collectively saying, we need to get Rick Devens out. Using the Diamond Power of Veto this aggressively could shatter that illusion. Yash and Kamu are going to know exactly what he did. If both somehow house survive this week, Devens suddenly has two capable competitors who have every reason in the world to come directly after him. Taylor and Lala could become firmly anti-Devens as well, and everybody else gets undeniable proof that Devens isn't just the funny Survivor guy hanging out and making TV. He's the guy controlling the fucking game. That's why I think this could cost him a ton of social capital for something he doesn't necessarily need to do right now. But even after saying all of that, he's still number one, because until somebody actually knocks him off his perch, I can't put anybody above him. He has the best information network in the house. People constantly fold when he presses him. He has strong relationships across multiple groups. He hasn't touched a block through 6 weeks, and now he's sitting on a Diamond Power of Veto that allows him to essentially hijack somebody else's HOH. I just think we're finally reaching the point where Devens can become his own biggest enemy. He has so much power that he doesn't need to force anything anymore. Sometimes the best move when you're this well positioned is to just let the game come to you. Instead, Devens wants his TV moment, and we're about to find out whether using this Diamond Power of Veto cements himself as the kingpin of Big Brother 28, or finally gives the rest of the house a reason to come for the king. Alrighty guys, and that was my Big Brother 28 player rankings for week number 6. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to check all the links down below as well. Follow me on Twitter at Drew Talks. Read my articles. Buy something from my wife's Depop, and let me know your player rankings in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.